Hi, it's Miss Marsden. I'm going to take you through a lesson on biodiversity today. So, first task is linked back to what you've already learned as part of this topic. So, what you need to do, if you're not entirely sure of the answers, I'd look back at your notes from the last few weeks. Questions 1, 2 and 3 come from the first lesson in this topic. Question 4 comes from lesson 2. And then question 5 comes from the 2 lessons which are about quadrating and transects. So question 5 is quite straightforward. You just need to fill in the gaps to give you a full description. But what I would do if you're still not confident with this is I would write the full thing down so you have some notes to refer to if you ever need this again. Should only take about 7 minutes on these questions, so pause the video for as long as you need to, and I'm going to go through the answers on the next slide now. You need a different colour pen, and you can pick any of the 3 things which are listed at the top. So you can have food, shelter, oxygen and carbon dioxide if you're talking about plants, pollination as well if you're talking about plants. A community, you're focusing on, oops, I've got that the wrong way around. So we're talking about, for number 2, that's the definition of a population. So please forgive me, I have got those the wrong way around. So defining a community, it's the total number of all individuals of all the living species in an ecosystem. So a community is all the plants, all the animals living together within an ecosystem. In a population, you're only looking at the total number of individuals of one species. So a population might be foxes, for example. So 2 and 3 are the wrong way around. I'm really sorry about that. Explain what would happen to a population of rabbits if the number of foxes in the ecosystem increased. I've just written the word decrease, but you could have gone into more detail and explained why. You could have talked about the fact that the foxes are predators, the rabbits are prey. And then for number 5, I only left a few key details out. So you calculate the area of your sampling size using length times width. Do the same thing for your quadrat, length times width. And where you've measured out your area, that'll form you an axis, and you can generate random coordinates on those axes using either a random number generator or picking numbers out of a hat. So then you need to place your quadrat on your first coordinate, and you count the number of organisms you're looking at, for example clovers, and then you record it. Repeat that 10 times, and then you calculate the mean number of organisms for calculate the mean number of organisms per quadrat. So if you're looking at clovers, for example, you're looking at the mean number per quadrat, and you've got that by adding together all the values, and then you divide them by 10. You then multiply that mean number by the number of times your quadrat will fit into the area. So if you've got a 1 metre squared quadrat and an area of 20 metres squared, then you would times your mean by 20, for example. And that'll give you your estimate of the population of that organism, and the example I'm using is clovers, for example. So again, if you didn't fully understand that, just make sure you copy it out, and then you can write your own method for a given problem. For example, you want to explain how to estimate the number of dandelions in a given area. So let's move on. So within this lesson, it's quite a short one because this is quite a short topic. What we need to be able to do is we need to be able to define what biodiversity is to start off with, and then describe the importance of it. We're going to describe some methods being employed to maintain biodiversity, and we're going to explain how those methods will help support maintaining biodiversity. Firstly, if we look at these 2 photos, this is not in your booklet, But what I'd like you to do is just identify the main differences between these two ecosystems. For example, one of them is likely to have a lot of rain, the other one isn't. So identify as many main differences between those two ecosystems as you can. Pause it for as long as you need to make a list. So, if we compare these two pictures, we think A has got a lot more variety of plants. It's got trees, you've got ferns, you've got a lot of leaves, and there's probably a lot of animals that are living within those plants. If we compare that to B, B is very dry, it's very arid, and there's not a massive variety of plants. You can just see some bushes, and effectively they probably are all the same species. So when we're talking about biodiversity, we just need to split that word up into two. So bio means living, and diversity means you've got lots of different species. So biodiversity is the range of different plant and animal species living within an ecosystem. So the more plants and animals you have, the greater biodiversity there is. So which one of the photos, A or B, shows greater biodiversity? There's a space for this in your booklet for you to answer this question. So you should have written your answer down, and you should say that A has got greater biodiversity because there are more plants and likely, you can't see them, but there's likely more animal species living within that ecosystem. Do the same thing again. There's no space in your booklet for this, but you can add your notes. Which of these photos shows greater biodiversity and why? Make sure you get your why explanation. So if you say B, I think it is B because. I think it is A because. So in a different coloured pen to mark your answer, you should have said A because you can see more plant species. You can see lots of different colours of flowers there, and they are likely different species. More species of plants, greater biodiversity. In B, you can just see it's one type of plant. There's not a great biodiversity at all. Same thing again. This is quite an easy one. So A or B and why. Pause it if you need to, but I'm just going to give you 20 seconds to answer this question. Like I said, there's no space in the booklet, but make notes if you wish. So you should have said B because we've got, you can see in the background, there's lots of species of trees there, and obviously you've got sheep and cows as well. So B is more biodiverse because there's a greater number of animals and plants compared to A. So we know what biodiversity is, and the first outcome for today, we need to be able to explain why is it so important. And if we think about linking this to the Do Now questions today, actually all this topic does link together. So all living species, they're interdependent on each other. So all that means is they rely on each other for one thing or another. For example, food, shelter, oxygen, carbon dioxide, when we're talking about plants. When we have a greater biodiversity, it ensures there's lots of food sources, so any species doesn't have to depend on a single food source. When we link that back to our food webs, the more producers, for example, in an ecosystem, in a food web, if you remove one of them, then the rest of the organisms can probably survive. However, if you have a lower biodiversity, you remove one food source, everything which relies on that solely would suffer. Speaking completely selfishly, a high biodiversity provides humans with food, medicines, building materials, which is great for us, but not necessarily beneficial for the animals that rely on them. And that completely human-driven view of that all these great food sources, all these sources of medicine and building materials, us exploiting them is putting species in danger of becoming extinct. We should know that becoming extinct just means there are no more of those species left. For example, dodos are extinct because there's no more of them existing. There's so many animals that are on the brink of extinction. If you think about polar bears, any endangered species, they're at risk of becoming extinct because of what humans are doing. If you think about deforestation and cutting down the rainforests, hunting, fishing, that's all affecting the biodiversity of certain ecosystems, and it means that the animals which are dependent on those things are put at risk. If we lose, for example, in a marine ecosystem, we lose all the cod because we've overfished them, that decreases the biodiversity. Higher biodiversity, the better. What we need to focus on now is we've caused these problems, we've caused this decrease in biodiversity. What we need to think about is how can we maintain it and how can we improve it for the sake of every other species apart from humans. This is relatively new information, and what we can do is we can have captive breeding programs, for example in zoos where they breed elephants, for example. We can use gene bank, and all that means is we keep the genes of certain animals, for example pandas. You keep a sample of genes, and what that means is should they go extinct, then we have access to genes of those animals or plants. We can legally protect habitats. For example, the Amazon rainforest isn't protected, so we can cut that down all we want. But if that was to be made into a national park and to be protected, then people wouldn't be able to cut it down anymore. So that begs the question, why are we not actually doing that? Link that back to last week where we were talking about global warming. We need to focus on reducing carbon dioxide. If you're a polar bear and the ice caps are melting because of increased carbon dioxide emissions, then you're in trouble. We need to focus on recycling resources. If we think about wood, if you're recycling it, then you're not going to cut as much of the rainforest down to get new wood. We need to educate people, because I would bet that a lot of people are actually unaware of the damage that this is doing. And if you do look at any website like WWF or you watch any documentaries about this, actually you will realise the extent of it, and you're probably more willing to do something about it once you know. So in the booklet you've got information about 3 different methods of maintaining and reducing the impact of human impact on biodiversity. So we're focusing on how can we maintain biodiversity, how can we reduce the impact. I just talked about education programs there. So in the describe what it is box, you just say what is it, really straightforward. So it's teaching people about the importance of biodiversity and the consequences of our own action. And then you need to link that to how does that help improve biodiversity. It changes their attitudes, they're less likely to engage in behaviours that would impact biodiversity, for example. So you need to use the information in the booklet, the tables in your booklet as well. You need to complete the table, please, and then I'm going to go through it on the next slide. So pause the video for as long as you need to. In a different pen, what I would like you to do is improve your answers. So captive breeding is in a controlled environment. For example, if you want to put an example there, like a zoo. Gene banks is just preservation of genetic material, so you freeze it, so it keeps it for years and years. And that can be used for cloning endangered species. If you reproduce more of an endangered species or you reintroduce an extinct species, that's going to increase diversity because you're adding another species to an ecosystem. Legal protection of habitats, like I said, it's quite straightforward. You just use the law to protect habitats and the organisms within them. So well done if you got those, but again, just add that extra information because it's just demonstrating that you understand what it is and how it impacts biodiversity. So there are 3 questions, and what I would like you to do, these 3 questions, which is what is biodiversity, why is it important, and to describe one way humans are trying to protect biodiversity of plants and animals. So I want you to email those answers back to your teacher, and you also need to send your completed booklet back to your teacher. It's a really short booklet this week. I haven't added any extra questions because biodiversity is such a small part. There's not actually any questions which link directly to this topic. So just something to think about: if bee populations are falling, and if they were to become extinct, what effect would this have on food supplies? So I want you to research that if you wish, because actually, even though bees don't seem that important, it will have a far-reaching effect on the biodiversity of a lot of organisms. So if you're interested, please do research that. It is actually really, really interesting. And then the last thing, I'm going to put an optional home learning task to look at some extra methods to protect biodiversity. It's going to be in folder, and if you want to complete that, please do send it to your teacher for extra credit, because obviously there's so much to learn about this topic and I've only gone through the bare minimum today.